All right, all right, all right. Welcome, everybody. And for those who are tuning in, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Grief Let's Talk About It podcast. Today, we have an excellent panel and a great discussion that we're going to be diving to. Today, we're going to be talking about how grief affects the body. And before we get started, I just want to introduce my panel from left to right. Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dave Roberts. I'm an author, recent podcast host. Um, I'm a bereavement support specialist, a retired addiction counselor, and an adjunct professor of psychology, child life at Utica University. So I wear uh, quite a few hats,
All
but I have
right.
fun doing it.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for being here, Dave. Chad?
All right. Namaste, everybody. My name is Chad Nails. I'm a certified life, relationship, and identity coach based out of New Jersey. I'm also certified in cognitive behavioral therapy, neuro linguistic programming, and psychoanalysis. And for specific purposes here, I'll also put that I am a certified grief counselor as well.
Awesome, awesome. Billy?
Hi, I'm Billy Groom. I am a canine cognitive behavioral therapy expert. So I work with people worldwide to work with their canines to overcome issues, anxiety, aggression. And a lot of those are emotional based and they can also carry over into the physical. So I'm glad to be talking here today. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for being here. Choice?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good day, I would say, wherever you're tuning in from. I am Troy Simmons. I am a certified grief support specialist slash coach. I'm an author, a licensed educational therapist, a mom, and I thank you for having me. I work with children with learning disabilities and their families to advocate and navigate through special education, as well as everyone from children to adults navigating grief.
Awesome. Thank you for being on the panel. D?
Hi, I'm Dee. I'm founder of the Unplugged Grief Ministries and the podcast. I'm a certified grief and master life coach, mental health coach, and recently cancer care ministries coach.
Awesome, awesome. And as always, you guys know who I am. I'm Tony. I'm your host. I am a certified grief coach. I am a mental health first aider. I am a podcaster. And also, I'm just an all around awesome guy, you know.
This is true.
You guys tuning in, you know what I'm saying? You know what to do. You know what I'm saying? If you haven't already, go to the channel, subscribe to it, and let us know what you think about it. Be sure to ask us questions as we're going along. And as I said today, we have a great topic for you. We're talking about how grief affects the body. And I want to kick this off, you know, because a lot of people don't even know, you know, how does grief affect the body?
There is a saying, if you don't deal with it, it will deal with you.
Mhm.
And so I truly believe that grief, as it manifests on the outside, it then begins to reflect on, as it manifests on the inside, it then begins to reflect on the outside. It attacks things that we can't even see on the inside, which then causes us to react and respond and live differently on the outside.
Nice, nice.
I
Anyone
mean,
else?
there are some distinct changes physically, cognitively, emotionally that we go through in the early stages of grief. Physically, and I can speak from my own experience following the transition of my daughter Janine in 2018 or 2003, excuse me. One was lack of sleep. If I got about 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, I was lucky, and that was just I think because of the stress of a loss that defied the natural orders of the universe that it placed on my body, the shock, the numbness that I went through for quite a period trying to make sense out of everything. So lack of sleep was something that, and that affected me. I mean, there are other things. A compromised immune system is another thing, especially with the stress of grief. Um, our immune systems become compromised. We're more susceptible to illness. I've also read that heart attacks are 21 times more likely to occur within the first 24 hours of a death, just because of increased blood pressure and circulation and stress. So there's a lot of things physically that happens. And I think as Troy says, we don't take proactive steps to deal with our grief, it will affect physically. And the way we think, I also believe, affects the way we feel. And that mind body connection is also very, very evident in grief as well, too.
I would definitely chime in along with what's been said already. I was already thinking when this topic was brought up, and with you putting the question out there, there's no way in the world that we can talk about this without talking about the body-mind connection, which is essentially, for all technical purposes, it's a feedback loop. But how you interact with the body affects the mind. What you deal with in the mind can affect the body. So I wanted to definitely just drop that one little coin in the fountain as far as talking about that, and I'm sure we'll be able to expound upon that as we go along with the discussion. But it can't be, that absolutely cannot be denied that there is a correlation between what you deal with mentally and how it shows up physically, and vice versa. So just to keep that as a point out there.
Yeah, nice. I like that. Anybody want to dovetail?
I know. For me, I first had to deal with anticipatory grief with my son. And I think the stress, that type of grief also provides, gives you that stress. So with all that stress of not only his care, to manage his care, to manage his appointments, to manage his medications, to manage his ventilator, to manage his wheelchair, all that being dumped on top of each other, I think it sort of helped or contributed towards my colon cancer. And then after he passed away, then the cancer came back. So it was like, no matter what type of grief we go through, it's funny how the mind and the body works together, but at the same time, how the stress of it kicks in and it just puts you down, and you think you're doing a great job until, your doctor calls you and say, you need to rush to the ER right away. Like, why?
I love what he said about that, is we think we're doing great. I mean, I'm sure this is equal with men, but I know a lot of women, we think we're superpowers. We think stress, that's stupid. We don't have stress. We can deal with everything. And we have, because, so we have this stress piling on, but at some point it hits high. And then that is when it carries over to the physical. For me, it was the grief of losing dogs and just moving forward, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to write my book, and I'm going to do my podcast, and I've got my business, and I can keep going. And then my inner system just shut down, where I couldn't keep any food in, and I eat very healthy, and I'm very active and take care of myself. But I started going, okay, I need to approach this, rehabilitate this physically. So I did the probiotic and the prebiotic and the blah, blah, blah. And it took a lot for me to say, no, this is an emotional, this is a mental, which is funny because that's what I deal with I work with dogs, is dealing with addressing the reason for the behavior, not the behavior itself. That's the whole point of CBT, is you address the reason, which Chad and Dave and others in here know as well. It's not about the behavior itself. It's about the reason. So it was funny that it actually took me a while for me to come around and to think about that chicken or the egg. Which is it? Is it the physical affecting the mental, affecting the emotional, or the physical is the behavior affecting the emotional that's affecting the physical? So if we look at it holistically, which is where Chad was going, exactly where Chad was going, what he said, it's taking that holistic approach instead of separating them all. And maybe we'll never know which came first. But when we address them all as a whole, then the physical might start getting better before the emotional, or maybe the emotional will get better before the physical. But when we can view it that way, we can start making progress.
I love that. And thank you for that. Billy. I try to liken it, and I use this often with my clients, the very simple analogy of, and I'm taking us back to high school a little bit. So if that's a little bit of a sore spot or soft spot, I'm sorry in advance. I'm taking us back to high school algebra. And I like using the analogy of a simple algebraic formula, right? And one of the first things that you learn about an algebraic formula is when you're trying to solve for it, or when you're trying to balance it out, what do they teach you to do? Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other in order to balance it out and get everything level. So I take that approach very often when it comes to trying to gauge or trying to figure out, because like Billy said, there's very few instances where that we can absolutely know exactly which one came first. Is it physical? Was it a physical impact and then it hurts you mentally, like being in a car accident and where there was a physical injury, and then there was the cascading effect to your mental or your emotional? Or was it an emotional origin where you suffer through a really bad breakup or a really horrible divorce, and then you're not certain what your options are, and then you get to that breaking point or that high point where it then cascades over into the body, and now you're worried, and now you're developing ulcers, and so figuring out, doing what you can, and it's not an exact science, of course, but doing what you can to assess as best as possible what the origin is, so that you can go with that root portion first, and employ our various measures and our various skills and techniques to aid the person in beginning to beginning to heal them up, and beginning to have them understand what the source is and stuff like that. Because for me personally, nothing is more powerful than a person understanding how they got somewhere, and then aiding them in walking things back. So I try to go with it from that perspective.
Okay.
And I also think listening to everybody, there's a couple of things that what Dee was talking about in terms of colon cancer. One of the things, there's several cancers that I'm aware of that are stress related, that stress can induce specific type of cancers. The other thing is that during grief, physically, we have more inflammation in certain parts of our bodies. And there is, I believe, a correlation between inflammation and also certain types of cancers. And to get back to the whole mind-body connection that Chad and Billy and everybody else have been alluding to, Dan Condren wrote a book many, many years ago called Permanent Healing. And Condren himself is a doctor. And he talked about how, and this is his play on words, disease, and he would hyphenate that, thoughts could impact and have an effect on specific physical ailments. So if I had a specific negative thought, that could be correlated with a specific physical ailment. And the way that I would treat that physical ailment would be to change the thought, in addition, obviously, to getting medical attention. But I would also change that framework, change my mindset, so that if I have a healthy mind, I also have a healthy body. The other thing I think that complicates the physical aspect of grief is what happens to us cognitively. And it isn't just the forgetfulness, the disorientation, the lack of concentration that occur in early grief. For me, and I can only speak for me, I had to figure out literally after my daughter transitioned what kind of a world I wanted to live in, what kind of a person that I want to be. And I'm paraphrasing this from the late great drummer Neil Peart of Rush, who said that because of his own challenges. I had to figure out the type of person I wanted to be and the type of world I wanted to live in. And let me tell you something, Tony and Chad and Dee and Choice and Billy, that was some of the most grueling work I've ever done in terms of trying to figure out, do I want to exist in a world where my daughter is not physically present? How am I going to survive in a world? And that cognitive work, it probably took me about 3 to 5 years to come to a point where I could, begin to kind of make sense out of everything and begin to kind of reestablish that I did want to live with meaning again. And it was that kind of a process. But that also complicates the fatigue, the physical fatigue, the lack of sleep, and everything else we go through, just the mental exhaustion that goes through in terms of trying to rethink everything.
I could definitely agree with that. And again, speaking from my experience, when I lost my son, the lack of sleep that was there, my appetite was good, but I ate a lot of junk food, right? I ate a lot of processed foods. And it took me a while because I got out of one habit from being an ex-bodybuilder, eating clean and, still having that same routine. I still kept the same routine, but I filled it in with McDonald's burgers or, Wendy's or something like that, big old bag of donuts or something like that. And I was always used to not sleeping, so that 2 to 3 hours a night, it didn't bother me to if I was up for 3 or 4 days. I just never put 2 and 2 together until later on afterwards. Like it was totally normal. And I think in a way it was like myself, I was trying to preserve something, right? I didn't want to face the dreams. I didn't want to face those different things. But I did start having complications like getting sick. I was carrying around extra phlegm or mucus in the body, right? And I would find myself from time to time, it coming out. So, but I never put 2 and 2 together. I could never put 2 and 2 together. Problems with my stomach. Like I would have pains in my stomach and things like that, or or shortness of breath. I could never put 2 and 2 together until I started doing the research about the gut-brain connection and how grief affects all of these things, right? And what parts of the body it was affecting. And I was like, oh, okay. So when I started understanding, I just started doing a little bit more research. I was able to go in and address those things. You know what I'm saying? Not in a way of medication, but in a way of addressing my grief. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like I can't hold this in because this is affecting my heart in this way. I can't do this. You know what I'm saying? I have to switch up what I'm doing because it's affecting, the way my gut is secreting, which was causing all of those extra ailments to come about.
Tony, this is just maybe a hypothetical question. So you felt like you were eating a lot after your son passed away, right?
Oh yeah,
That might have been emotional eating.
Well, I had that routine before. So, coming out of bodybuilding, I was already eating 12 to 16 times out of the day. It was just a routine. At that time, I was already weighing around 300 pounds and I worked out consistently. So it was nothing for me to add in that, to keep that routine going. I just switched up the foods that I was eating. So before I was eating cleaner, I was eating, chicken and potatoes or, fish and vegetables and things like that. So I still had that routine. I just wasn't eating the foods. So yes, in a way it was like stress eating. It was nothing for me to go to the store and grab 5 bags of donuts and a big old Pepsi or a Mountain Dew and go back home, and sit down and down it. It wasn't nothing like that. Or go get 2 large pieces and 5 burgers and come back home and sit down and eat it. It wasn't nothing for me to do that. So I just never connected the two. You know what I'm saying? When I switched up the routine, I could never associate my eating habits changing changing dramatically, associated with what I was going through, as far as losing my son. I just never did. It never dawned on me.
I find this interesting talking about routine, because routine is often a physical routine that we do. We get up in the morning, we shower, we go for a dog walk, or we stretch, or we get on our computer, whatever. And this takes us through the day. It's a physical routine, but it affects us mentally.
Right.
It affects, it's actually a mentor. It brings us, people rely on that so much sometimes. And when something such as somebody passing in our lives, and I'm going to include a pet in that as a family member, because they become something that we care for and cares for us and is part of our emotional, mental, and physical routine in a day. When that changes, that effect of changing routine, and often overnight, if it is, or if we've been caring for a loved one and that has taken up most of our time in our day, going back to what Dee was saying, just so much that she was taking on caring, and then all of a sudden that stops. It is obviously the grief of losing that loved one, but it's also that change in routine, which can be incredibly stressful. And people like Tony may deal with that by changing their eating habits, not for the better. Or, we all have perhaps not great habits that we take on when routine changes. And when I work with dogs, a lot of what I'm doing is getting them comfortable with change in routine, because they're very, very well behaved and great when they're comfortable with the routine. But as soon as their pet person does something out of routine, or as soon as something is not where it should be, or how they feel it should go, or what they're used to, it's stressful. So the ability to have our mind, going back to what Tony was saying, our ability, or maybe it was Dave, sorry, I'm not sure now, but it was somebody who was talking, maybe Chad, I don't know, somebody about, maybe I need to work on my memory, about how the mindset and changing the mindset and being comfortable with that change in routine, or what we expect to happen, or what we're used to happening. And instead of having that become something that's stressful, going back to what Dave said, how do we now fit ourselves into our life? Who are we now in our life without this person that not controlled, but created our routine for us?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing.
Oh, we can't hear you, Choice, or
Yeah,
I
we can't hear you, Choice.
Of course, it would be me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, we can hear you now. The old Verizon test. Can you hear me
Oh
now?
my goodness. One thing that I was thinking about, I was thinking about many things as you guys were speaking, Chad, Dave, Billy, even Tony. And what keeps jumping out to me is identity. Being able to identify. Sometimes we're in, not sometimes, but for most people, when we're grieving, and when you're coming from a place of being used to taking care of others, or where you're coming from a place um, of maybe not even knowing yourself, and you became a new person, or your identity was different when your loved one was alive and you no longer had that identity. I think of identity in that aspect, but then I also think of identity in the fact of being able to identify. And when we're talking about the cognitive and the behaviors, and um, we have to find a way of being able to know what the problem is. We know where it stemmed from, but we now have to identify, okay, now what is the problem? They said he had to be able to find out who was he after his daughter passed away. And so we have to be vulnerable with ourselves. I know for me, after my mom passed away, um, I took on the identity of being a guardian for my younger brother. I had no clue. He wasn't my son, he was her son. I had no clue how to take care of a child, but I had to become someone I was not, as well as grieve the loss of my mother. And I realized along the way that I put on this face, or what people now call it. Um, it just jumped out of my head so quick. But you
Like
become
a
someone,
surrogate.
no, where you become someone else, and you don't recognize that you've become someone else because of the grief that you were carrying,
Mm-hmm.
because of the roles that you now have to play, and you become that change of identity now is no longer recognizable to you, the person, but people who see you as someone, like Billy said. As women, we think we're superwoman. We take on all of these different roles, and grief, for me, I didn't have that opportunity to slow down. And I didn't realize that staying busy was my way of avoiding dealing with the grief. I didn't realize that until really I start to identify, this is what I'm doing. I'm not doing these certain things because I don't want to feel the pain, because I felt like I couldn't, because I had someone else to take care of. I couldn't break down. I couldn't be weak. I had to be strong for everybody else. And so being able to identify, being able to be real with yourself, whatever, if you're going to therapy or if you have someone to talk to or if you're doing a support group, but being able to identify the feelings that you're feeling and begin working towards now figuring out what does life look like without our loved ones here. How do you want to live? But you have to first be honest with, I'm not dealing with certain things, and these certain things are causing depression. I know for me, it was very hard for me to be honest and say, I'm depressed. Like, I didn't want people to look at me like this strong person, like, you're depressed. You're not depressed. Like, you walk around carrying the weight of the world on your shoulder. But really, I'm struggling and no one sees it because I put on this other face as I am
Mhm.
the strong person. And so I had to start saying, Choice, you're not being honest with yourself. And because you're not being honest with yourself, other people don't even recognize that you're struggling. And because of that, it caused health issues for me. Like you said, Tony, gut issues, digestive issues, mental issues, physical issues with your heart. And it's all because we know the common denominator, going back to how Chad used math, the common denominator is the grief
Mm.
that we're carrying. But now we have to look at that numerator. Like, what is it that we're piling on top of that grief that
Right.
is causing our health to be unhealthy? How we're dealing with the grief, whether it's trying to find the ways to deal with it in a healthy way versus allowing the grief to consume us and cause the unhealthy issues um, in our lives. So yeah, sorry I rambled on and on and on,
Um,
but
I want to acknowledge some of the people in the comments right now. I got my auntie in there. Hi, auntie. Thank you for tuning in. Ada is there. And also we have a LinkedIn user that had a comment in there that says routines can be a form of soothing. Actually agree with that as well. Depending on the individual, routines can be soothing or it can be very damaging as well. I have experience with both of them. I really
Yeah.
do.
It's the motive behind it. I
Yeah.
think
exactly.
that really is it being used as catharsis, as is it being used as a natural inherent stress reliever where you knowing yourself, I know I'm this person and I know that if I do this my stress level is going to go down,
Right.
versus I'm just doing this to stay busy, I'm doing this to keep my mind off of this, I'm doing this like don't do that. But I love what Choice was saying with the being aware, not just being aware of it, but actually acknowledging what's happening. I think that is absolutely crucial. So thank you so much for putting that out there. It can't just be it can't just be a baseline acknowledgement of it. There has to be something of an acceptance that you do with your situation. I think back when my kids were younger, and it just seemed like everything was going wrong, and this was all mostly mental and emotional instances where I was being negatively impacted. I was suffering from being verbally and emotionally abused. Stuff was happening with the family, stuff was happening with my job, with finances, and so on and so forth. And I took my kids to their annual checkup, and The pediatrician does the annual, they do the checkup, and they excuse me from the room. And they're speaking to my then wife at the time. And my wife then comes out to the car and was like, the doctor thinks you're on heroin. And I'm like, what is she talking about? Like, never touch this stuff, never would. But I was so out of it from everything that had been happening. And I don't know what a person on heroin even looks like, but the doctor's looking at me like, are these kids safe with you? Are you on something? And now I'm thinking, okay, I have to go find out what a person on heroin even looks like, because I'm exhibiting to this medical professional, I'm exhibiting symptoms of something I've never physically taken. And I think I laughed too when she told me. But it was the shock more than anything. And so I'm like, well, what is it that would even have me looking like this, or that would even have somebody say something like that? And lo and behold, obviously there was no physical component because I don't take drugs like that. So I'm like, well, what is it? What's going on? And it's just unresolved, unacknowledged levels of stress, of anxiety, of worry, of guilt, of shame, you name it. And I did not take the time to take that in and be like, okay, this is what's happening. And thusly, from that, being able to say, okay, this is what I need to do. And there it is. There it is. I got called a drug addict without being a drug addict. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of our symptoms sort of mimics something like what she had thought was, without actually questioning you. So her mind was always automatically assumed.
Oh, yes.
Without having that private conversation with you. So I think she was trying to, I'm not trying to make an excuse for her. I think she was trying to play it safe.
Not at all, please.
I think she was trying to play it safe, but I'm sure your wife assured her that it was not, because if they had to, they can do a urine check, a blood check. There's nothing there. It's just, that's what stress does to people. And apparently that's not how it affects her, like it's the way it affects you. So, but grief also will mimic. And it's amazing how many people who've gone through college and residency and all this stuff for 8+ years, and they still don't understand the body language of a griever, you know?
That's interesting. That's interesting. How many times have people been misdiagnosed, right? Because I know just recently, I was in the hospital, and the doctor kept asking me, "Am I going to go through withdrawals?" I said, "Withdrawals from what?" Yeah, because my body was seizing up and things like that, and they was checking my fluid levels, and I was kind of dehydrated at the time, and I was very tired. I was just tired, And so the doctor kept asking. He goes, "Well, are you on anything?" I said, "No, I'm not on anything." He goes, "Well," he would walk away. He would come back and he would look at his chart and go, "Do we have to worry about you going through withdrawals?" I said, "Withdrawals from what?" And then the next thing that he did, he left and came back in with a nurse, and they pulled up my sleeves to see if I had track marks.
Wow.
And I'm going, "What are you looking for?" They were like, "Well, we're looking for track marks and everything, because sometimes heroin addicts will deny the fact that they're using heroin, or meth addicts or something like that." And I'm going, "I've never even touched this stuff before. What are you?" And then I stopped and I thought about it. I said, "Before you go any further, I am coming up on some anniversaries from some loved ones that I've lost. And still, I don't think in computer, because I think he's still thinking in, saying, in doctor language. And I'm talking to him in griever language, right? Like, no, I understand what you're saying. I am retired. I am exhausted right now. And so this is what you're seeing. You're seeing the effects of it that it's having on my body, And he's looking at me. He goes, "Well, I want to run some more tests." After a while, I just stopped saying anything. So how many times have people been misdiagnosed, by doctors, that are actually going through something emotional, you know what I'm saying, stressful, or
Well,
things like that.
well, one thing, if you look at children who are grieving, they can exhibit behavioral symptoms that are very similar to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly if somebody is experiencing behaviors where there's no prior history, the first thing that's important is we determine, is there a physical condition that needs to be ruled out or ruled in to account for the behavior, or is there something going on in that person's social circle? And with kids, it could be a divorce, it could be the parents are arguing, it could be a death in the family.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, and I do believe that. I think the other thing is individuals who come in with a very intuitive, multidimensional sense of the world get misdiagnosed with ADHD and anxiety because of the way they see the world. They see the world very multidimensionally. They're very intuitive, and they're afraid to own that because they may be seen as being different or viewed as crazy or not believable. But here's the other thing. I was reading this recently, and I'm sure, I don't know if anybody has heard of Bessel van der Kolk. He wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And one of the things I was reading, and I'm going to try to paraphrase this as best as I can and summarize it as best as I can. He was doing some research, and I believe he's a well-known neurologist, and he's done a lot of research in terms of how the body holds trauma and that whole body-mind connection. He did some research, which I found was fascinating, where he had individuals with trauma write scripts and then read those scripts out loud and see through magnetic resonance imaging, took a look at which parts of the brains were activated and which parts of the brain were deactivated. He looked at left and right brain, and the left brain helps us verbalize trauma. It helps us make sense and integrate trauma. The right side is response to the images, sounds, verbal or visual cues that are associated with trauma. And van der Kolk explained that when we have flashbacks of trauma, we experience those sounds and images, not the entire thing, not the entire trauma. But what he found was that the left part of the brain, which was specifically a part called Broca's area, which is responsible for language and verbalizing trauma, shut completely down when that script was read. And the right side of the brain was highly activated, which meant it was sensitized to a very heightened response to images, sounds, and visual cues that were associated with the trauma that was recreated. I found that to be fascinating. And I was thinking, Chad, for you, and maybe for Tony, is, heroin is a sedative hypnotic drug, and it just slows down the response to everything. And maybe that's what they were cueing into, because, people will say, I have no words for the trauma. I have no words for what's happened to me. There may be a scientific explanation for that particularly in early grief or when trauma has not been addressed or through therapy or through other means, those are the effects that it has on the brain, which I found fascinating just for reading that.
But that relates to a question or a comment that's in there right now from Denise, my auntie. She says, yesterday was hard for me because, her mom, my grandmother, received the readings on April 14th, 1996, and it still hurts. And so she repeats and says she was out of it yesterday, which relates to what we were just talking about. The body keeps the score, right? The body still recognizes that grief is still there, and it can affect you mentally. I do feel that it does. It definitely can affect you mentally. And again, speaking from my perspective, mentally, after I lost my mother 2 years after my son, I isolated really hard. I became angry. I became irrational in my choices. And there was just a part of me that was just wanting to run for the most part. I just wanted to run away from everything, just be done. And so I think it does correlate with that. When you don't deal with these things, you do have those thoughts. It does affect you in a lot of different ways, right? I met people who ended up in the hospital with ulcers and couldn't figure out why they ended up there. I've met young men who experience paralysis. And young men, well, mostly young men, because that's what I deal with on a regular basis is young men. I've met young men who have had experienced paralysis for up to 3 to 4 weeks, and sometimes 2 to 6 months, and never had a stroke a day in their life. So I do agree with that. It can affect you. It can have an adverse effect on you in so many different ways, but you have to deal with it though. You definitely have to address those things in order for it to not happen so frequently or to the extent that it does.
Dave, it's interesting that you brought up flashbacks. I was just speaking with a friend of mine today, actually, who is going through therapy and had been experiencing flashbacks, and they are so they have a huge effect. They really do. They're part of therapy, but they're also, if it's controlled, certainly not my area of expertise at all. But I find that book and what you were talking about really interesting and went along a lot with what she was talking about, in that it can really affect the physical and the sleep. And that is one thing I think has come up a number of times today in this chat is sleep or lack thereof. And I always wonder, or I try to, I don't sleep well, but the sleep affects how well you function the next day, perhaps mentally. And for someone like Tony and myself, maybe not the next day, maybe it would take 3, 4, 5 nights of not great sleep before it affects that. But then how does not sleeping affect how we eat, which then eating goes to the brain, right? If you don't eat healthy, your brain doesn't function properly. So then you're making poor decisions. You're stressed. So then you're not sleeping well. So this gets right back, I guess, to the beginning where the chicken or the egg and trying to address everything holistically. So for me, I do exercise. It's my way for my brain more than anything. I know if I'm making poor decisions or I can't make decisions or I can't get something figured out, I go for a really, which Tony and I talked about before, throwing in our shadow boxing and our runs and our workouts and just really getting all that adrenaline going. And then it helps the brain. And then we can stop and think about what it is that's really bothering us. Do we have a solution? Is there something we can do about it right now? If not, can we move that forward and be okay with ourselves until we then hit that point? And we're just able to better address and deal with things, I think, when we sleep well, even though we can say to ourselves, I don't need sleep.
Oh, don't convince yourself that you don't. That'd be my rule of thumb to anybody. Don't convince yourself that you don't. And I say that more so from a not just from the fact that it's just having rest is just good for you, but even from a neurological perspective, sleep allows your body to decompile everything that it takes in during the day. All right. And you study, like if you study something, if you learn something and then this has been proven. When you study something or you learn something, and then you get a good night's rest, it allows your brain to effectively process the information that you're taking in. If you're not getting that sleep in, and it's not even just, study type information, is think about how much information we take in along all of our different aspects over the course of the day, from a mental point, from an emotional point, from a spiritual point, from a physical point, from a social point, from a professional point, and all the other points in between. Without rest, you do not allow your brain. I'm not even going to talk about the mind just yet. But without that rest, you're not allowing your brain adequate time to decompile, to decompress, to kind of like open up that zip folder, so to speak, and put the information where it needs to go. And you do that long enough, it can put you in a position where it just hits this critical mass where you don't know where anything is coming from anymore. And the body does not like that. The body does not like disarray. Nor the body, nor the brain, nor the mind likes disarray. So it's going to do what it feels it needs to in order to kind of balance things back out. If you've taken on too much and the body's saying, I want to let go of this, and you're not letting go of it mentally or emotionally, the body's going to let go of something, right? It's like one of the classic things that people used to say about people who worry too much, and then they made a correlation between excessive worrying and having ulcers. The body wants you to let go of the worry.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't let go of the worry, what were they saying? Well, if you're not letting go of the worry, the body was letting go of your stomach lining, which is what allows for the ulcers to come. You know, or what's the other old wives' tale? If you worry too much, you lose your hair. I don't even know if that's a 100% correlation to it, but that's what people used to say.
I started putting my head down. I was like, "Whoa, shoot!"
Listen, I'm not just wearing this for fashion, okay?
I started looking in the mirror. I was like, "Well, we can talk about it."
At least I got the most hair of the two men on the panel.
You know what? Don't be bragging.
I joke and say all of it moved from here to here.
Oh man, look.
And that's not saying a lot, but I got more hair than the two guys on the panel.
Look, he's over there bragging. That's what he's bragging right now. You know, I was like, all right, you know,
hey,
calling me out over here. You know, I see my shiny spot. You ain't got to be putting me on the table like that.
Listen, I made an executive decision today. I saw a sign that said, "Be kind and be humble." I decided I was just going to be kind.
Yeah.
I exercised my free will just to do one or the other. So I decided to be kind. Maybe tomorrow I'll be humble.
I can definitely understand that. You know, I try to practice a little bit of both. And some days I don't. You know, some days I just wake up and just go, you know what? Today I am unsupervised. So whatever happens, it's definitely not my fault. I tell people not to leave me alone like that, you know. So I don't take responsibilities on those days. I really don't. That leads to a couple questions that I have when it comes down to sleep and everything, because I have been known, you know, and I guess it just comes from years of being on the streets and, you know, gang banging and things like that. You know, I've been known to go a week and a half without sleep and just keep moving. You know what I'm saying? I can work through the hallucinations I see on day 3 and day 4, right? Without crashing. I just know how to keep moving with it. Yeah. And eventually when I crash, I only get, you know, when I did eventually crash, I would get 3-4 hours of sleep and I'm back up moving again. You know, so, and I know that's not natural, but I do associate it with it now that we're talking about it. I associate it with, you know, seeing some of the things I've seen, you know, watching my friends die and things like that, being there holding their hands and stuff like that. And so to me, I've always associated it to, you know, survival. You know, I have to keep moving because I don't want, you know, I see what just happened when you stop moving, right? And so in the back of my mind, if I move, you can't get me. You can't get me, you know what I'm saying? And so you know, a week and a half, you know, it's the longest I've ever gone, but I have done that before. So my question is, how long would it take for someone going through a stressful situation until the body starts to react in a negative way, right? You know what I'm saying? Because I know so everybody functions differently, but from a psychological standpoint, you know, how long would you say? How long would you say that can go on?
My experience from what I've encountered, it can be as fast as within 72 hours, 3 days.
So it would also, I guess, depend, Chad, on what the people are doing in their day and what they
absolutely
personally consider themselves being able to function.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You know, if they're achieving their goals and functioning as they feel fit, then they will continue to not sleep. Although having said that, we may know that we need sleep, but not be able to do so.
Yeah.
And then it comes out both physical and lack of productivity or inability to complete what we want to complete, whether that's physical or whether that is just being able to express our thoughts. Like Denise, who put in a comment a bit ago, just saying that she just couldn't express her thoughts. That actually, when I had stress and writing my book and all sorts of things, just the ability to complete that, express thoughts. Physical, I probably was okay, except for the gut. But that's an interesting point because it comes out differently. We could talk about losing hair.
So true.
Clearly not my problem, or it's not even a problem, but certainly not from stress. That's because if it was from stress, I'd be looking like you guys. So, but there's other things, for me, for some people, they might have cold sores, right? Or
Yeah.
even a twitch of the eye
Mhm.
is technically physical, but does it come from the mental and the emotional?
Mhm.
And things like cold sores or skin rashes or hot spots. And on dogs, they can get hot spots. And is that physical? Well, yes, it's physical, but does it come from stress? There's a good chance it does. So these physical, if people try to address them only from a physical point of view instead of thinking of the mental or emotional.
It's true.
And I think too, to assess one's sleep, the lack of sleep becomes problematic. I think to dovetail off what Billy said, you have to look at the related emotional and other types of cognitive effects that may be going on. I mean, particularly when I don't sleep for 2 or 3 nights, I tend to get real irritable. Now, for some individuals, particularly in early grief, where there's an enormous amount of release of the stress hormone cortisol, which interferes with our ability to sleep anyway. If that's continuing to be secreted under a high amount of stress, eventually it's going to probably come out in terms of raging, in terms of maybe, again, compromised immune system, which could lead to cold sores, could lead to illness. I think once you see a lack of sleep beginning to, where you see an individual deviate from what normal functioning, where it starts impacting their ability to engage to the extent that they're capable of engaging in that stage of grief, then I think we need to look at it as a potential problem area. The other thing with sleep too is I tell individuals they can sleep like a baby, do that. Like a lot of times when our kids were little, I would lay down when they would lay down. So if they were used to getting 6-7 hours of good sleep a night and are only getting 3 due to grief, if they can lay down an hour or two, or even or rest, even if they're not sleeping, just rest their body to just kind of reduce their stress, that may have some type of rejuvenated effect as well too. So I also try to get them to look at sleep differently, and to try to take naps when they can or capable of during the day, just to try to recoup some of their energy and to deal with stress.
And yeah, kind of to piggyback what everyone was saying, I was getting back to your original question, Tony, how long it would take um, for a lack of sleep to affect us. I also piggyback what Billy was saying. I think um, it is also the things that factor, because it's one thing to get a lack of sleep, but as Tony said, and Billy and all of us, when we're talking about what other things play a factor um, in the lack of sleep. So I can not be sleeping because of grief, but I could also how it shows up could also be determined on what I'm dealing with in my home. It can also be determined on the things that I'm dealing with at work, and then and the irritability that comes along with that. So it can be, for me, it can be as much as I feel like I can thrive on 3-4 hours of sleep, but if my 18-year-old son is affecting me in other ways at home, or people on my job are doing things that are affecting me, I'm going to be irritated. I'm
Mhm.
going to be irritated. I'm going to be quiet. And I noticed that for me, when I was grieving, um, I shut down on the outside because I was trying to process and deal with my emotions and my feelings on the inside, so that I didn't lash out on people, so that I didn't come off and speak and talk aggressively or in an angry way, because I may have been tired, or because I'm dealing with life and I'm dealing with carrying the weight of the world.
Mhm.
But it goes back to me saying being able to identify. It may not be within 24 hours or 72 hours. Things can be okay, and I can thrive off of 3, 4 hours of sleep. But then when I start factoring in those other things and what life looks like and how life is affecting me, then I will begin to show different signs of different emotions and how it's affected me mentally, not just physically.
And emotionally.
Mhm.
I,
Mhm.
I guess I have a question about, I understand exactly what you're saying, because again, I've been known to, like when I have a project or something, I've been known to stay up. I've been known to stay up until that project is done. At least until, what I'm saying, I got most of the things out the way, and then I can sit back in my chair, throw my head back, and kind of cat nap, right, for 30, 45 minutes and be right back up and keep moving. Now, everybody's different. Everybody, I don't recommend that for anyone because it can get exhausting. Everybody is different though in how you function. I do recommend people get sleep. So which leads us to the next question. How detrimental is the food that you put into your body when you're grieving? um, I mean, how important is that? Because that can affect everything. It can affect the way that you think. It can affect the way your body functions and things like that. I know it's real quick to go get a Red Bull, an energy drink, and want to down that, and not really think about the adverse effects of the crash that comes after, right? Or it's real easy to go get yourself a bag of M&Ms or Skittles, something with high sugar content, just to keep your body functioning in that direction and not really understand the consequences that come behind that as well. So, how detrimental is the food that you put into your body when you're going through the grieving process?
I
I
think it
think
has a lot to do with it, because even with me, maybe sugar would be okay for you, but for me, if I have something that's a sugary food, which may explain why sometimes I'm out before 7 o'clock at night, it knocks me out.
Hmm.
But sugar might give you the energy that you need, but it knocks me out,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense.
It does.
yeah.
That's definitely a
I,
case, but definitely a case. But go ahead, Dave.
no, go ahead, Chad. I can go after you.
I would definitely say it's a case by case thing, and there are so many
Mhm.
other factors that have to go into that. D, I could relate to you on that one. I'm getting off of being diabetic uh, right now, where if I were grieving something right now, and if I were to go back to my old eating habits, I'd actually be putting myself back in a world of hurt. Um, so it really has to. It's something that you I would recommend that one stays very mindful of, not just in the course of the consistency or the frequency of your eating, but really be mindful of what you're putting in your body is going to do for you on both ends, both on the mental end and the physical end. What you eat, you eat good stuff, and it can. We've seen this. We know this. We all have this. You have something that's good for you, and it actually tastes good. It can actually raise your mood. Why? Because it's causing it's causing your serotonin levels to go up. It's causing your dopamine levels to go up. It's releasing things based off of what you're taking in. Subsequently, if it's not as good, even though it may taste good, the effects might be positive in the short term, but in the long term, I'm not even saying long term in terms of like way down the road, but like Tony was saying, after that crash, you can end up in a worse spot when it comes to that physiological feedback. It could be good in the short term and make you worse in the medium to long term, or it could be less enjoyable in the short term, being that it's
Mhm.
good for you, but it's yielding medium to long term positive, positive changes that may actually even allow you to handle the grief better.
Yeah.
From a
Right.
mental standpoint. So it is absolutely crucial. It is absolutely very important. That's why, like, when I think back to when my dad passed away back in 2021, and then everybody brought chicken. Everybody, we had more chicken than we knew what to do with. I didn't want to eat. By the time we got rid of that chicken, I didn't touch chicken again for like 2 to 3 months. Everybody brought chicken. And I'm like, it was baked chicken, fried chicken. It was chicken pot pies, and just any variation of chicken you could think of, right? And then that had me thinking, like, why does everybody think that this is comfort food? But it's a legitimate question. What does good chicken do for you?
It's
right.
Yeah,
It's a good source of protein. We know that, right? If it's not done sloppily, where it's just a whole bunch of chicken and grease or this, that, and the third, and it's actually done in a really nice way, not only is it yielding the short-term results is in the notion that you're eating something good, but you're actually putting halfway decent stuff in your body. So it yields there. And as much as I was tired of the chicken, I also have to be honest and say, you know what, having all that chicken did kind of help. I feel bad. I feel bad about some memory that I had about dad or this, that, and third, just going through the grief process. And it was nice to go to the fridge and just pull a leg and be okay.
I can dig that.
Yeah.
I can definitely dig that because, when we think about comfort food, I think about, being a child and, my grandmother's cooking and things like that, chicken and mashed potatoes, things like that, things that that brought some sort of relief in times of, because every time we used to have big family gatherings, it was either a holiday or someone had passed. And pretty much the food was always the same: homemade cherry pies, cakes, chitlins, things like that, things. And so I often, and this is something to consider as well, or, if you want to dive into it, when I'm now coming back to it, when my son passed away, when I was cooking, I would cook those things that I remembered that brought some sort of comfort in my life from when I was a child. So it was like taking me back to a childhood to where I was able to deal on a level that was okay for me. And the one thing that did oftentimes, it just put me to sleep, right? I had to unbuckle that belt or something like that, kick that foot up and put your head back a little bit, and I realized now, thinking back on it, when I switched my eating habits to eat more junk food, I didn't want to cook anymore. I would say 6 months after my son passed away, I didn't want to cook anymore, right? So I find myself, shopping at your local Wendy's, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? The local Little Caesars, because back then Little Caesars was doing the deal. You know what I'm saying? $5 pepperoni pieces.
Man,
I would get 3 of those things, man, and go home and sit down, and before I'm down on the last box with one slice of pizza, and I'm sitting back going like this. Okay, I'm still hungry.
exactly.
So I definitely understand that, but it never put me to sleep though. I think it made me more anxious than anything else. The physical parts of it, working out, I was dangerous when it came down to that, because after a while I stopped caring, right? And instead of using working out as a way to stay healthy, here I am, 313 pounds, 314 pounds, and I want to bench 556 pounds with no spotter. Yeah, that was me. That was me.
But as a man, I'm gonna be careful how I say this, but because I know a woman can be like this too. But mostly as a man, because I think you said this earlier, the routine of what you were used to eating, and then when you bench it, you were working it off. You were taking off all those calories and everything. Whenever you benched it, whenever you were jumping jacks or go running or whatever, you were working it off. And I know women go through the same thing. I guess it depends on how physics is. Me, unfortunately, I can't. But anyway, but for me, what you were describing, any kind of dessert, any kind of bread, any kind of pasta, any kind of potato, knocks me out. So it's like, I think it's like Chad said, our bodies are all so different, and God created us all so different, and we all deal with our health factors in a different way, but we all learn from our health factors as well as we learn from each other. What should I not do? What do I need to make changes? And thankfully, we have some physicians that are well enough to say, well, don't eat this anymore, or don't eat this anymore. And because of my colon cancer, I also have to be careful of what I eat, because even that affects that as well. So I love bread, I love my potatoes, I love my pasta, but I have to be careful when I eat it. When I eat it, it has to be at a time where I know it's not gonna knock me out,
There it is.
And you have to
That's
watch your blood
absolutely
sugar too. So, I think you said this, Chat. By being a diabetic, we have to watch our blood sugar, because all those foods, your blood sugar glucose goes up, and that's enough to knock you out.
I think
I'm sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sure somebody somewhere has done a study on this, and I'm inspired by this conversation to go and look to actually do the real high science work of understanding not just what foods do to us in terms of the nutrients that they give our, the minerals and nutrients that they give our body, but the signals that they give to our body to do this, that, and the third. If I eat if we eat something that we typically enjoy, I would wager that there's a signal to our body that said, "Oh, he's enjoying this. She's enjoying this. He's enjoying this. Let the serotonin fly."
Yeah.
Because that's one of our many pleasure hormones. Or dopamine, or this, that, and third. But going under those surfaces to find out what else is being said. And how does that affect our certain states? If I'm happy and I eat something enjoyable, does it take my happiness limit up one, or do I just kind of maintain that? If I'm sad and I eat something that I enjoy, does that aid in me dealing with it because of what's being released? So it's one of those, again, it's one of those many, nuanced factors that we have to consider. I hear a lot of people say nowadays, this new notion of, eating for your body type, right? And that requires having an understanding of your family history. It has an element on understanding your genetics and so on and so forth. If y'all have heard about this at all, let me know. But having an understanding, going deeper into an understanding of yourself from a family history, from a genetic history, and then seeing those factors in front of you. Hey, this is what I can eat that helps to, augment this about. This is what I can eat that helps to serve as a catalyst for something that's already happening in me, or this is what I can eat to serve to help me avoid this about me, because that's a weak area that I have. And I bring that up to say we can certainly, I think, take that a step further to say I have to eat for my mental composition as well. If I know that I handle grief in these ways, if I know that I handle nervousness or anxiety or uncertainty or anger or sadness or things in such and such a way, but I also know that I can eat this, I can, in addition to all of the wonderful therapy and counseling and coaching techniques that I could bring in, that I could bring to bear on the situation. Hey, I can also eat this. I can drink this. That'll help me on the physiological end.
I also think if for me, my relationship with food was the most challenging thing to negotiate during grief. And I think for a couple of different reasons. I think one to be aware of sometimes in early grief, because we are so disorganized cognitively, because we are so fatigued, because our routine is so messed up, we may just put anything in our mouth just to either, just to get through that particular moment. We're not thinking about a specific shopping list. We're not in a position where we're thinking about which foods could be healthier with us. So with that being said, I encourage individuals to be gentle with themselves, particularly with that in early grief. If they are saying, well, geez, I'm not eating right. Well, you may not be capable because of what's going on in your body and your mind to make those kind of decisions. With that being said, as you continue to move through and acquire the tools with grief, I think dovetailing off of what Chad said, you can now take a look at your relationship with food, handle those triggers in terms of the foods that were unhealthy for you. For me, when I felt depressed or I felt sad, it would be carbs, it would be breads, it would be sweets, it would be that kind of comfort food. Then about a couple of years ago, I decided to just go on Noom, recreate a whole new different relationship with food, and address the mantra of I'm going to eat to live as opposed to live to eat. And I lost probably about over 70 pounds in about 2.5 years doing that, and recognizing which foods for me were going to help me in terms of enhancing mood, enhancing energy, things like berries, foods that are high in antioxidants, proteins, less bad carbs, and also implement a routine of exercise. But it took me 18 years following the transition of my daughter to figure that out.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready to do that before then, which the other message is that when we're talking about the time it takes for us to incorporate those healthy lifestyle changes, time is relative. It's going to take as long as it's going to take for us to get there. It will take as long as it's going to take for us to get from the raw pain of grief to a point where we're going to we choose to re-engage in life again and accept that our world is different because our loved ones aren't in it. And that also includes our four-legged pets, our companions, our pets. That also is part of the equation as well too. And so that's all I got. That's all I got.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Lag there for a second. I love that you brought up Noom. I was going to talk about that because whenever I'm on as a guest on podcasts and shows, radio shows and stuff, in relation to canine cognitive behavioral therapy, or even with my clients, they'll ask, how is it different than standard methods? And one example that I'll always, or seems to go over well to use, is the difference between Noom and Jenny Craig. And so when you have people that have eating disorders versus they just want to lose weight. So the reason for the behavior, which I keep getting back to, but if people are eating out of stress or anxiety, but they know that a bag of potato chips is way worse to eat than an apple. They know that. They already know that. They're well aware. They're not uneducated as to nutrition and health, but they still can't help it. Noom has incorporated cognitive behavioral therapy, whereas Jenny Craig works mostly off of conditioning methods, which in the dog world, conditioning methods are very common. They're normal, and conditioning methods are reward-based. So Jenny Craig, if you eat this food plan for a week, then we'll give you a free food plan next, or we'll add food into your food plan and give you credits and things like this. So you're working a lot off of, they educate you. This is a healthy diet plan. This is why it's healthy. This is what you should eat. And then we're going to reward you with this. And it works for a lot of people. So does conditioning methods for dogs. It particularly works for puppies because they just don't even know right from wrong. And then they get rewarded for doing right behavior. Noom, as Dave brought up, has incorporated cognitive behavioral therapy. So you actually stop and think, why am I eating this? Why am I reaching for this bag of chips? Is it solving my problem? How am I going to feel tomorrow? This is another thing about emotion, is the actual physical food in the body can affect the way, as Dee brought up, can affect the way, and Chad, that it actually makes us feel physically. And that's different for different people and how it affects them and that type of thing. And yeah, I'm a carb junkie. I love my carbs. But and I always feel good on them. But emotionally, the next day, maybe not. So that's that's not my body telling me I feel terrible. That's my brain saying, you really didn't need to eat a loaf of bread last night. Like you really didn't need to. And then I feel crappy about myself, not because I physically feel crappy, but I feel crappy because I know I can burn it off. Because as Dee was talking about, yeah, I'm a cardio junkie and a carb junkie, and I burn it off, and everything's in excess. Used to, I've learned to manage that. I've learned to manage. You just, where is that coming from? Is that an emotional, a physical? But anyway, getting back to the Noom and the Jenny Craig, I think that's a really good example of why it was effective with Dave, because it was more from, they address it more from the reason why you're doing something, as opposed to educating and rewarding. And that's, I don't know, Dave, if you want to chime back in on that, but I use that example all the time, and it makes sense to people.
Well, yeah, and it did. What it did is it also had articles that went along with an eating plan, and the articles just taught you how to rethink your triggers about food, to rethink your relationship with food. That's cognitive behavioral therapy approach.
Trigger, yeah.
It also incorporates what Chad does with mindfulness. So it's mindfulness, CBT, and just being aware in the moment. And the other thing I like about Noom is that they taught their mantra is progress, not perfection. And so often, depending on our own histories with trauma outside of grief, depending on our own histories and in general, if we've had a history of perfectionism, we tend to be pretty hard on ourselves. And when we look at progress, not perfection, Noom says, okay, if you have a bad meal, you have a bad day, you just go back to the plan. It's not a big deal. One day isn't going to be a catastrophe. You just go back to what was working before and you pick up from there, which is what I liked about it. It was a very reasonable approach, a very incremental approach, and they individualized plans based on, it was a totally based on client self-determination in terms of how much weight they wanted to lose, how much time they wanted to take to use it. It was really, really good. And it worked for me. It worked for me. That's just what I did. I've kept the weight off now for well over a year. I've kept it off using those same approaches.
Nice. Joyce, you want to chime in on that one?
I was just thinking about how we're talking about the comfort foods and how we will choose a bag of chips over an apple, or how we, just eating the different foods and how those foods affect our bodies just as well as how grief affects our bodies. So when we think about if we eat too much sugar and how that makes us feel, but then when we think about how grief itself, how it affects our body as well, being mindful of not just the things that we put in our mouths, but also um, making the best decisions for ourselves um, to tackle the reasons why. So as everyone was saying, being able to the cognitive, how we're thinking, the decisions that we're making, and it's hard. It's easier said than it's easier to say I'm going to do things differently or I'm going to eat healthy, as well as it's hard for us to identify with those things of how grief makes us feel, to address them. And so finding that way, I guess, of tying them both together, finding that balance. It's not that, and I keep thinking about the commercial, the Snickers commercial, where it says you get hangry when you don't have a Snickers, when you don't have a Snickers. That just keeps popping into my mind, and it's like, okay, so how we um, how how we're looking at, okay, you need a Snickers, and that's going to address the emotions that you're dealing with, that emotion of anger, how you may eat those chips and it makes you feel good in the moment, but then you're dealing with high blood pressure? Are you the from the sugar, you're dealing with the inflammation in your body? And for those who eat too much grease, or they who eat pork, who deals with gout, and it's like, okay, you make the decisions that you make because it makes you feel good, not. But now it's like, do you just want to feel good, or do you want to make the wise decisions that you need to make in order for you to be healthy? Especially when we're grieving, we don't always want to respond in the ways that we respond, but we know that we're responding in the way that we do because of the grief. And it's not always a healthy way. Or for those who turn to alcohol or who turn to drugs um, to help them cope with the pain that they're feeling, because they want to numb everything they don't want to feel. And it's the same thing with food. Those who overeat, who, Dee, I believe you said it earlier, people who eat for comfort, they know that they shouldn't sit and eat a whole bag of chips and a pane of ice cream, but at that moment, it made them feel good. And so just recognizing those different things, and working towards healthy habits and not unhealthy habits, I think is very important. And recognizing how our grief affects us and the way that we're thinking, that is also causing us to do the things that we do.
We might want to just chime in too for the listeners that are the opposite. They don't eat.
Mhm.
So the
Yeah.
effect of not eating.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
I have
'cause-
a question.
And how the body responds to that.
Mm-hmm. And I like that. I definitely like that. I do have a question now. When it comes down to, early grievers or people who are still, in the not so beginning stages of the grief. Now, what do you think is better, or does it really matter? A vegan diet, um, eating, having your proteins and things like that, or fasting.
I think it all depends on individual preference. I think it
Mhm.
depends on past history of what's been successful. I think it's important that if they've had a history of weight loss or healthy eating before, what worked best for them, and incorporate those strengths into their current situation. And I think it also really, as therapists and as coaches, we have to, it's always client centered. It's basically meeting the client where they're at, what they think is going to work best for them, and us working with that. And as we begin to build a relationship, gradually make some other suggestions that may align with their thinking, or give them some different perspectives. So Tony, I mean, it's whatever gets you through the night. It's whatever is going to work for you, whatever's going to be successful, whether it's vegan, whether it's fasting, intermittent fasting, high protein, low carb, whatever works.
Yeah. Well, the reason being, because I fasted before, and I know that fasting actually helps reset the body, right? You know what I'm saying? It helps detoxify it. It helps reset those receptors, and you feel a lot better coming off. I've done a 10-day fast. I've done a 15-day fast. I have yet to do a 30-day fast. I'm not quite sure. I do love eating, but I have done a vegan diet where, I felt phenomenal on it. You know what I'm saying? And the reason being, it was a quote that I heard a while back. And he was talking about eating dead meat first versus eating, living vegetables, things like that. So, and it was an argument that was going on between veganism and eating regular meat, right? And I agree with what Dave just said. It all depends on the individual. And I also understand that when you're going through the grieving process, there are things that changes within you, and your body starts to require different things, right? And I'm a firm believer. I tell my clients, I said, listen to what your body's asking you to do, right? Just listen to it. If you're craving spinach or something like that, go out there and get some fresh spinach. You know, if you're craving that protein and things like that, go out there and get that. So, and I just thought it was an interesting question to put out there. for those that are out there, those who are listening, because I have seen the benefits from all three. I really have.
And when you ask that question, Tony, it makes me go back and think about what Chad said about um, eating for your body type.
Mhm.
I know for me, after an extensive, I won't say denial, but after neglecting myself and my body for so long after my mom passed away, the effects that it had on my body, and I didn't realize what it was doing. Um, I I was so used to taking care of other people that I wasn't taking care of myself,
Mhm.
and I didn't recognize that the health concerns that I was having, um, the excessive blood loss that I didn't know. I believe Chad had also mentioned something about knowing your history. When after losing my mom, I had to really scramble around to different family members to ask questions about our family history, about heart issues, about psychological, mental, just different things and how those things affect the way that we do things. But um, when I began to see my hematologist for my blood disorder, they told me to eat for my blood type. So I had to really change the way that
Mm,
I ate because of you know I knew that grief was affecting me, but then I also knew that the grief had then began to affect my health. But eating for my blood type, anyone can do it. And like Dave said, it depends on the individual person, but we all have blood running through our bodies. And so
just-
when I recognized that me eating for my blood type, they told me to become a vegan. I said I'm not doing that. Like I need some type of some type of meat in my diet, but then I became a pescatarian and I
mm,
recognized that I needed the vegetables. I needed high levels of iron because without these things, I will be groggy. Like I recognized what not having certain foods in my diet did to my body. And so I recommend for anybody to learn your history, know your history, and pay attention to what different foods do to
yeah.
you and understanding should you it's not that we can't have the sweets because believe me, I love my chocolate ice cream now, even at 12 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But I know I need to do it before 12 o'clock. And I need to work out. Don't just eat the ice cream, but just doing it in moderation, not completely. I hate the word diet because I'm not trying to diet to the foods that I eat, but at the same time, I want to be healthy. So finding that balance and recognizing and understanding the connections between the foods and how they make you feel.
I know if I'm grieving and you tell me I can't have meat, I understand that you're choosing violence for that day with me. Um, no, it's real talk. The choice you said it fantastically. I have actually heard of that eating for your blood type thing, and I think I want to go and research that some more and try to incorporate that. And it really is at the end of the day, we're talking about making the best choices based off of how well you know yourself, right? It's based off of how well you know yourself when it comes to how you breathe, how fast you move through the stages of it, and how the what you do to manage your stress, what you do to for catharsis, what you do for your hobbies, this, that, and third, and understanding what those best practices are and training yourself to make that second nature so that when something does come up, because we all know it will, it's not a scramble for you to be like, oh God, what do I do? It's okay, I understand this is what's happening. This is what I understand myself. I'm going to attach my practices and my knowledge of what I need to do and what I need to eat, this, then, and third. To that. My mood. And one of the ways that I have been able to combat depression has been largely through what I eat. Why? Because I understand myself well enough to know, hey, I love cooking. I love cooking. and I understand combining that love and that understanding of myself with also my understanding of, hey, when I eat this or when I cook this, it does this. When I cook, it's catharsis. Or when I make this, I understand that it's going to do this for me, chemically wise or hormonally or this, that, and the third. Or it's just going to help me feel good, and it's going to give me some type of basis or foundation for me to navigate whatever it is that's in front of me. Now, did I have to make choices in moderation to make those more effective? Yes. Did I change up what meats I eat? Absolutely. I barely eat pork anymore. All right. I had to train myself to say that turkey bacon was fantastic. And now I can say it and not be lying.
We gotta talk about that.
Instead of going to grab ground beef anymore, I went looking for farms that had wild game. So now instead of beef, if I really want, something hearty, I'll go get some ground venison or some ground elk or something. And it's better. It's ultimately better for me because it's not processed. It's found out in nature. I put it in order, and somewhere in the country, a deer loses its life. I'm okay with that. But it's making those things. It's looking at, it's understanding. Hey, I know for a fact, like what Billy was saying, we all know. So we all have a basic understanding of what good nutrition is, right? But it has to be catered. It has to be catered to us. I know dark leafy greens are ultimately good for you. I had to go and figure out which ones I knew I was going to gravitate to the most. I happen to love spinach and kale. You don't have to twist my arm to eat that stuff. I eat it by the pound. Not a problem. I hated beans. But everybody's saying, well, beans are good for you. Beans are okay, fine. I had to go figure out which beans I was going to work with. I happen to love Great Northern beans. I don't use any other beans because I don't. It doesn't appeal to, no other bean appeals to me like that. But now that I have it, I'm good. And now my meals are more balanced. And because my meals are more balanced, I'm more balanced.
As a vegetarian, Chad, or as a previous vegetarian,
oh, God
one
bless.
Of the things that we grew up with, especially when we used to farm on land, because we really didn't eat meat,
Yeah.
we substitute the meat for another type of vegetarian, another type of protein. So like
Okay.
beans would be the protein, or peanut butter would be the protein, or whatever. Well, kale, the greens is what was giving you the iron, because the greens give you the iron. So there's certain types of foods, instead of eating the meat itself, there's other things that can substitute the meat, like the beans and the peanut butter and so on like that. And also tofu, what tofu is really made out of soybeans. So, but what, Tony, you don't like tofu?
I'm listening to all of these things that you're putting out there, and I'm with Chad. I'm
I'm saying this is the way I was brought up.
I understand.
Yeah.
trust me, I understand. But like I said, I'm with Chad. I eat a lot of wild game. I eat ostrich. I eat antelope. I've had I eat bear. I've had mountain lion. I had buffalo. You put in your orders. So there's an animal out there that's about to lose his life. And then when I do get the
ethically,
technically, well, a lot of times what I do, like I love the fish, so I love fresh fish.
Yeah.
I fish for trout, walleye, all of those things. I won't buy it out the store because I don't like processed fish. I don't like farm raised fish. But when I do get the chance and I grab a bow and arrow or something, I go out there hunting with my boys or something. Ostrich is on the menu. Rabbit, all of those different things. If I can kill it, I'm going to cook it for the most part, and I just find that it's just a lot healthier because I know that it's on the land. It's eating from the land. It's something natural, right? So I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Now I have done vegan diets as well. Tofu, that's why I shook my head. Tofu, no, I am not going to do that. Tofu don't taste like burgers. It don't taste like chicken. It tastes like tofu. Yeah.
Yes, it's not meant to taste like chicken or anything like that.
No.
Tofu is mostly meant to taste what's the word I want to use? We used to use it to eat it like as scrambled eggs because we didn't eat eggs.
Mhm.
It
You
takes on the
see,
flavor of
so you know,
whatever you-
everybody.
I'm not opposed to tofu. Just me as a man, I'm concerned about the estrogen levels.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
but this is what happened when I in the 70s when I was growing up.
Yeah.
How we all eat nowadays, everything has changed. But that's the way I was brought up. Does it mean I eat that way now? No, but I just remember what we used what as proteins because
Yeah.
we didn't eat meat, you know. So,
See,
but
y'all gotta understand.
There are absolutely occasions where I do go the alternative route, and it's just like, okay, I'm gonna take a break from me because I know as much as I love it, that's a process on my on my gut system and stuff like that. So I'll go the lighter route, and I stay I literally keep peanut butter on me
yeah.
for that reason.
See,
I like that. I
No.
definitely like that. Now, with that being said, fellas, we're running over time. It's we can go forever. So I want to say, man, thank you guys for being on the panel today. And before we close out, I want to say for everyone who's been leaving comments, Auntie, thank you for being there, and everyone else who's been tuning in. We'll be back after the conference, so. Keep that in mind. April 28th, April 29th, April 30th, we got the Global Grief Conference going on, and every night we will have a table talk. So, tune in for that as well. If you guys love these panel discussions, show support to the channel. Go there and hit that notification button, hit that subscribe, and share it with your friends. Let everybody else know what we're going on. And if you have a topic that you would love us to talk about, let us know because, God, man, we have so much fun doing this. Now, before we say goodbye, I want my panel to let you know where you can find them and leave you with words of inspiration. Dave, you want to kick it off?
Yes. I'm Dave Roberts. You can find me. My email address is bootsyandangel@gmail.com. You can reach me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. If you want to find out more about the book I co-authored with Reverend Patty Farino, When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, you can go on Amazon. You can go to our dedicated book website, which is psychologyprofessorandminister.com. And I'm looking forward to the Global Grief Conference. This will be my second year being involved with it. I'm looking forward to it. I would encourage those who are listening, sign up. There's going to be some great coaches, grief workers, therapists that will have a lot to share, a lot of inspirational information and tools that will help you through grief.
Yes, you can find me on Facebook mostly. I believe I'm on Instagram, but I don't remember at the moment. But you can also find me at my website, www.unpluggedgrief.org. Also, my podcast, anchor.fm/unplug-grief. And now I'm also on YouTube for my podcast. So also Unplugged Grief Ministries. And I am also speaking at the Unplugged Grief Ministries. I'm sorry, at the Global Grief Conference. This will be my second year as well. So I look forward to seeing everyone there.
All right, Chad.
Okay. All right. Again, namaste, and hope everybody had a great time with this conversation. I know I did. You can reach me on Facebook at Chad H. Nails. All other platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find me at Unveiled Coach, where I help you to uncover more of you so you have more to use. And you can also reach me directly. I have a phone number that you can reach me if you need a conference line. I pick up pretty much all the time. And that is 862-256-0614. You can reach me there as well.
Awesome. Billy.
Yeah, this was really fun. I really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for joining who listened in, and I also will be speaking at the conference, which I'm super excited about. It's my first year doing it, so I'm super excited. You can find me. I'm active on LinkedIn, which I'm Billy Groom on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, Billy Groom, and also my business Facebook is Upward Dogology. So that's Upward as in UPWARD, which is actually an acronym for Urban People with Adolescent and Rescued Dogs. So Upward Dogology. My website is www.upwarddogology.com. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm around. I also have a link tree which has all my the links to my book and my podcast. I have my own podcast, Upward Dog Training Disrupted by Upward Dogology, and then I host on a number of different podcasts. Those links are all on my website and to my link tree as well.
Awesome. Choice?
As everyone said, it's been a great night. The topic was great. The conversation was great. So I can be found at I am choice with a Y, S Simmons, and that's S as in Sam, Simmons.com. You can find me on Facebook as well. I'm not really big on social media. I'm trying to do better. But you can find me on social media at Facebook at choice_Simmons, I believe. I think. You can reach me by email at beautifulminds with an S, CCLLC at gmail.com. Um, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I am also a first time presenter at the Global Grief Conference. So I really look forward to not only sharing with everyone a little bit of my knowledge and a little bit of my experience, but also listening and learning from everyone else who's also presenting. So thank you for tonight, and I look forward to connecting again.
Yes. And I am Tony Lynch. I'm your host. And I'm also the founder of Memories of Us, where we offer grief support to men. You guys can find me on Facebook, Memories of Us LTD, Grief Support for Men. You can find me on Instagram, Men's Grief Support. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Tony Lynch, where you will see inspiring stories. If you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can see those stories firsthand where we do lives. We do these panel discussions bi-weekly. The next time that we are do another panel discussion will be after the Global Grief Conference. But that does not stop us from doing it, though, because we still have these table talks going on late night. So if you guys want to hear the raw truth or raw stories and get those answers that you have, those questions that you have answered, come in, tune in on those late nights. But don't forget to tune in and watch these amazing presenters. And if you are a grief worker and you're looking for a place to feel like home, come join the Global Grief Network. Well, we're all family over here. This is where we support each other. This is where we uplift each other, and this is where we all share information. And you never have to turn anybody away. So, and with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank my panel for being here, because without you guys, this would not be possible. And stay tuned. We have a lot more coming. Got a lot more coming. So you guys keep your head up. We love you, and thank you for allowing us to support you.
All right.
Bye. Good night. See you next